everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I'm Kurt Schmidt, president at Foundry, and this channel is dedicated to helping inspire and educate leaders in design and technology. I am super excited, as always, to talk to my guest today. Brian Rowe. Brian Rowe and I have worked together many times in the past, and he's someone I count as a good friend and probably one of the most intelligent people I know. So we're all going to learn a lot today, and I can't tell you how excited I am to talk to Brian, especially about this subject, which personally has always been a challenging subject for me. So I want to introduce Brian. Brian, how are you today, sir?
After that introduction, better. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say after that lovely and kind intro, I am better. Thank you.
Good. Well, Brian, tell me a little bit about your past. You've worked in everything from design to management and leadership. What's your background? How can we tell everybody? Where did young Brian come from, and where is he now?
Right. Okay. I'll try to keep this part of the storytelling really short if I can. Suffice it to say, for anyone watching this today or later, my career path has been a very non-traditional one, and certainly not a linear one. And that's been kind of a theme throughout my life. It's definitely nothing's been linear. So undergraduate work was primarily in the performing arts. So that included traditional classic theater and music of all different stripes. I've been a performing musician my whole life, pretty much. And I transitioned early on into things like early digital multimedia, back when the word multimedia meant a thing.
Yes, interactive and multimedia.
Exactly right. Enhanced CD-ROMs and stuff like that, when putting video on a CD disc was like amazing.
Fantastic.
Much less putting it on the web.
Yes.
And then I've had stints in like big enterprise IT, and that has involved things like big systems integrations efforts. I've worked as an experienced designer in many different modes. I've also worked looking at the employee experience internal to companies. I've managed groups of designers and researchers in that space. And I guess you could say there's a kind of intersection of creative arts, design, technology, and that kind of design management and leadership.
A Renaissance man. That's
oh, it's awesome. When I was like, I think fourth grade, something like that, I was like, I should be a Renaissance man when I grow up. Only having like the slimmest understanding of what that might even mean.
Actually is.
And then realizing it's already then the 20th century. And of course, no one can actually do that.
Yes. Well, it is difficult to get the Medicis to sponsor you these days. Not quite the same world as it once was. Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to jump into our topic today, Brian, because you and I have not only worked together, we've worked on organizational change projects together and discovered them. And I think what I'm hearing from a lot of people this year, especially, is, the idea of doing organizational change virtually is really scary because in past, just organizational change, I think, ranks up there with layoffs as one of the most scary things for employees to have to hear about or experience. So there's that.
And the two get conflated a lot too. The people hear org change and they assume it means layoffs.
Exactly. So it's scary from the employee side, and but on the business side, things like numbers and all this stuff have to drive some of this strategy, vision, and all of those things. But now you take all of that and you have to do it virtually. It just seems so daunting to folks. And, I wanted to get your opinion on, do you see a big difference between organizational change happening virtually versus when we're all back in an office space? Does it matter?
Well, it matters. I guess the extent to which it matters is kind of how does it infect, shape, influence, change agents' thinking. It's almost like I want to kind of rewind a little bit of your question back to almost like really first principle basic stuff. If I was kind of, charged to kind of drive some kind of organizational change, I'm really at this point not quite worried what that is.
Sure.
Maybe something management related or departmental, or introducing new practices. I think a lot of that work comes to the table traditionally, with many, many different tools and techniques and things,
Yeah, lots of
in the
tools
grab
and
bag.
lots of techniques and lots of frameworks.
Yeah, and from what I've witnessed until relatively recently, a lot of that has been under the premise that, well, we do things in a structured, planned, more or less linear kind of fashion. We're going to have a roadmap for this change. We're going to expect certain results. A is going to lead to B, is going to lead to C to D. We're going to put posters up on the wall. We're going to have workshops with people from the outside telling us, things about mood elevators and whatnot.
Ooh,
And that those things will all beget some kind of predicted, known end state.
right,
Um,
right.
and we have been learning for decades about complex systems. And when we talk about change among a group of human beings, that is a complex system.
Yeah,
And so to expect that change is going to happen from the top down only, or from one locus of interest outward only, and it's going to do so in a linear fashion, is just simply not true.
mm.
But a lot of us seem to behave like that should be true. A
Yeah.
lot
That's
of
how
other
we
things we do
approach
in our
it.
workplace.
But that's how we approach a lot of problems in general, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And in some cases, in some contexts, that is true. Actually,
Hmm.
it's a merely complicated kind of thing that you can do the analysis, you can kind of lay the groundwork, and you can expect A to B to C to D,
Yep.
etc. Okay, so then you asked about virtual. Does it
Yep.
make a difference? It might make an awesome difference, actually. Again, depending on the mindsets we bring to bear. When people are suddenly fractured in the sense of being, surprisingly non-co-located, um, we might have a different landscape and a different license, maybe even latitude, to even start thinking about change differently. So I think that that's actually one of the opportunities hidden within the situation that we're experiencing today, is the fact that already people have had to, well, and not to be too blunt about it, kind of get over themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a T-shirt that sponsors a pinball arcade in Tempe, Arizona, and we're doing a very focused, hopefully, live chat for your
Yes.
audience. I have seen CEOs, other C-suites, senior VPs, everybody suddenly reduced in a loving way, reduced to this kind of very common humanity. And I know that that language sounds a little bit squishy, but as we talk about this more today, I'm sure we'll find out that rediscovering a connectivity in our common humanity is a huge component of grappling with uncertainty,
Yeah.
ambiguity, complexity, and, as we said, change.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's
in that
that's
sense, virtual does make a difference.
yeah, because back to that point, and I've said this on this show a number of times, so I apologize to people in the audience for beating a dead horse, but I really feel like this year has really shone a spotlight on really good leadership and really exposed bad leaders. Like they don't have a place to
Right.
hide
Right.
now, as once they did, which I think is interesting because since most of us are working from home, for example, you would think it would be easier to hide, but actually, I think it really shows in because we've had to rely so much on communication styles and communication tools and things that we haven't normally had
Right.
to rely so much on. It's really brought up and shown good leadership when it's good, and bad leadership is just bad when it's bad, right?
Right.
Do you feel
Right.
that same way?
Absolutely. Yes. Um, and I'm not sure if just because virtual, we are seeing the landscape shift in terms of organizations, institutions taking different steps to address, gaps in leadership, or where, and if I kind of wear my empathy a little bit closer, I might have a leader who is a person who's never been really encouraged, supported, or championed to grow in a direction that would allow them to really start to employ their own empathy
Mm-hmm.
in person, much less remotely. And
Right.
like you said, this exact situation lays that stuff bare. Um, do organizations take opportunity in hand and actually give those kinds of leaders a different kind of support? a different kind of challenge and a different kind of nurturing to amplify some of those components that are really necessary when we're not connected more closely.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, kind of an organizational choice. Do they want to invest some time and treasure potentially in really helping people grow in that direction as leaders? Other leaders may very much be firstborn almost to this.
Yeah.
And have kind of a little bit back to my performing arts background. I tend to frame a lot of things in terms of theater. This is a performance. I'm performing with you for an audience, and it's mediated in some way, brokered by this funny little camera thing that I'm pointing at, the browser that people are watching this through potentially, or their smartphone. Some people come to that kind of thing almost innately and get to open up a component or a facet of their personality. And other people find that, of course, very, very challenging. And do we actually support those people, leaders or individual contributors or anyone?
Yeah. And well, how are we doing that? And it goes back to something, again, I always say, is being intentional about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where, in the past, especially, I've been a part of a lot of growing, fast growing companies. Just, you make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
These are adults. They are professionals. So I don't want to micromanage them.
Right.
I have all these assumptions that I need to make in order to, not feel like I'm overstepping too much, right?
Right.
And I think that becomes a problem because people won't be as intentional.
Right. And I've found too, in terms of just observations, kind of a wide continuum of the way people are showing up now virtually together. So I'm kind of rewinding my brain and thinking about the challenge. And this is an example I'm kind of thinking back to in terms of like bigger healthcare companies. You have some kind of mandate to get disparate groups that are maybe cross-functional together to collaborate, capital C. And so people will begrudgingly kind of get into maybe a conference room together, talk with one another, ideally, talk at or past one another, more typically. And and then leave frustrated, and rightfully so, leave frustrated that not a lot of collaboration happened together. People felt collaborated at. And I've given that a lot of thought when I've seen those situations occur, because really, what's the failing there? Is it necessarily leadership? It wasn't virtual because we were in a room together. So what was that real hiccup or those hurdles? And it kind of started to kind of wash over me a little bit that people are told to do a thing like collaborate, but have they ever really been encouraged and supported to know how to collaborate? Have they even been given tools with which to do that? And sure, someone says, well, we've got a big screen here and we've got a whiteboard and maybe even some Post-it notes, collaborate away.
Yeah.
Do people actually know how to approach those things and start to use them in a way that's effective? And I've
that
learned
goes back
that
to my point, Brian, of like, they're professionals, they're adults.
Yeah.
They should be able, why as a leader, can't I just put my top people in a room and have them solve these problems? I mean, that's what I hired them for, right?
Right. Yeah. And if you're actually asking me, I think I have an answer for why. And again, it comes to linearity. I put those great, smart people in a room and I'm expecting an answer. And actually, I might be expecting a specific answer. I want to be validating something I think I already know, and I want them to come to it. There's a ton of different mixes there. What I didn't charge this group to do is go in and make learning the immediate objective. In that sense, I mean, I am struggling with some kind of problem. And rather than coming out of that room with the answer, I want people coming out of that room with ways to learn really fast about how to move forward. I want those people to come out of the room having externalized as much of that smart stuff in their heads as possible, so that it got out there in front of other people for them to react to, so that they in turn could also externalize maybe their differing perspectives and point of view on the problem or potential steps forward. And through that kind of lovely, gumbo of intersecting ideas that we've actually gotten out of our skulls, something new can come out of that. And I
Hmm.
think that that basic practice uh, requires a lot of things that people don't necessarily think to encourage when it comes to groups coming together, like openness. Did we create a space that's safe enough for people to actually be open to externalizing what's in their heads without fear of reprisal, without fear of judgment, without fear of, a self sense of being silly or, off
Yeah, not
topic or something?
not being taken professional, like the professional that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am.
yeah. Exactly. Have people been given the latitude to challenge assumptions going in?
Mm,
Have people been encouraged to actually invalidate what people are assuming? Because you were talking a second ago about going in with assumptions quite
right.
often. Have people been kind of encouraged, and indeed, has there been any kind of culture or habit or reward system around invalidating things, navigating around our own mental blind spots, um, opening up some of those different channels to differing perspectives? Because we've got all those smart people in the room, but they all look alike, talk alike, think alike, have shared sort of lived experiences. How much am I really going to get out of that session that's novel? um, and perhaps rewarding or innovative if I really have an echo chamber, kind of happening. So it's a lot of those things like designing the space and environment, designing the conversation itself, and then, oh yeah, we might actually design something. This could
Hmm.
be like a way forward, a plan, an experiment, even better, those kinds of things. And just thinking through some of those basic ideas isn't something I believe occurs to a lot of leaders when they say, go forth and collaborate together.
Yeah.
Now we throw virtual into the mix. Why should we expect that any of those problems just disappear because video cameras and Skype?
Right.
Um,
And dogs
they,
interrupting, dogs and kids interrupting.
yeah, yeah. So now we've actually removed some of those potentially familiar, environments, which could be a very good thing. That could free up people's thinking, but we didn't necessarily navigate uh, around and toward a habit of coming together and working together with this shared purpose, this desire to build a shared understanding. So now virtually, same problems, same kind of outcome that we would have had if we were in the room together, except now we've got, umpteen versions of a shared document that no one's reading again, just like we would have had previously. Or maybe even better yet, we have a shared document that's not versioned in the traditional sense, but happens to live on Teams or something. So at least we're all looking at the same source, but we still failed to actually reach that shared understanding component
Hmm.
that some of this good habit can kind of bring forward. So with virtual in the mix, we still have to think about those basics and give them a lot of time and attention and care and feeding for any of this to be, I think, genuinely productive.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up something. I was talking with a leader recently who had brought in a new leader of a department, and
Mhm.
that person, when they came in after a few weeks, ended up laying off half of the team because they referred to them as uncoachable.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I want to org change takes many forms. And I mean, I wanted to kind of pick your brain, Brian, on, let's say I'm a new man, let's say I'm a manager or leader of some kind, and I'm
Mhm.
coming into a situation now virtually, and I have to assess. Obviously, I have to assess my team. Are they capable? Are they, and what are some of the steps I should be taking as that person coming in to get to know that team, to best understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then when should I be really making the decision on whether or not I should actually have to make a change in the team? Is it true people are uncoachable, or am I a bad leader?
Kurt, I think you're a bad leader. Um, and I don't want to kind of pretend that there's like some clear binary here. Like we have two types of people, some that are coachable and some that aren't. The truth is inarguably going to be, a mix of all those different shades. And so, do we bump into that employee that's uncoachable? I might be able to stick that label on it, but is it more that it's not a good fit for function?
Hmm.
That someone's own true self is going to be perhaps in the first place difficult to engage with
Yep.
or
Yep.
help illuminate because of all manner of different, historical inputs and current culture at the organization or group, all these kinds of things that might mask or create very legitimate reasons for an individual to be quite resistant to change itself, to exposing something of themselves that's a little bit more genuine because perhaps they've been burned plenty of times in that regard and will not do it again. So even just getting to that whole, like you said, assessment, um, part of me gets a little bit itchy. It's like, okay, well, when we're talking assessment, what am
Yeah.
I actually assessing? Am I really truly getting to an understanding of this real person? Because that's what I would love to do.
Yeah,
Or
I
do I
mean, you
get
could
only
just
the
slap
surface level snapshot?
You could just
Yeah,
slap
yeah, yeah.
Strings Finder on or Myers Briggs and call it a day, right?
Right. But even if we did that, let's say that we did, I'm going to pick Strengths Finders over Myers Briggs. Even if we did that, did we stop at, hey, you got your top five and let's share them? Okay, great. And lunch. Or did we actually do some reflection individually and together? And did we do any theme weaving around what those strengths were
Hmm,
to help start teasing out some more stories from this person? That's what I'm chasing. If we're going to kind of dig into this, is like, what can I learn about that person's stories? And we
yep.
could use strengths finders as a kind of a lens to start illuminating some of those stories. And then that whole fit for function idea is like right now, um, and inescapably right now, we are faced with a VUCA world, VUCA. Is Kurt, are you familiar with that
No, tell me.
term? Okay. So I have been exposed to this in the past year, which is a world that is V, volatile, U, uncertain, C, complex, A, ambiguous.
Hmm,
And so being able to find that fit for function in a VUCA world might mean something very different than it might have meant, 20, 30 years ago when we're talking about assessment for a group or, a kind of work task or,
sure.
functions. Because now what I might be thinking about is how can I get to learn this new team that in your scenario I've been kind of introduced to, and what are their capabilities? In my mind, not just because of what we're all going through today. I'm going to be thinking about this VUCA world and I'm going to be really looking for what capabilities do they bring outside of just what I'm expecting that's like task based or skill or job function based. What are they bringing of their own stories that speaks to resilience in the face of volatility?
Hmm,
Um, a certain nerve or curiosity in the face of ambiguity. Is this somebody that can be genuinely forthright when things are so unclear and
yeah.
uncertain? And another thing I might be trying to identify is how wed is this person? And when I say this person, I'm also going to kind of cast that telescope back at myself. Me, how wed am I to getting certainty out of things versus how much of an appetite do I have instead for seeking clarity in things?
Hmm.
Because in this kind of world, looking for clarity is going to trump certainty every time.
Sure.
Absolutely every time. And if I can start learning some of those things about this team, now I might not know so much about like the job function skill stuff if I haven't really been digging into that, but I will be learning a lot about how this team is going to be able to come together in this kind of context where so many things are unfixed and again not
Yeah.
at all linear.
Yeah.
And that might be a real strength for that team that hasn't been tapped into yet.
Well, and that's why I bring it up, Brian, because as a leader, when I bring in a manager or director or somebody that's going to be leading a group, I'm not
Mhm.
bringing them in because I want the team to just maintain what it's currently been doing.
Yeah.
The hopes are is that bringing in this person levels them up, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I do, and I've been that person who's been charged with like get that team humming, get take that hill, blah blah blah.
Yep.
And so there is this drive to, like you said, just get efficiency and clarity. But there's also stats that seem to follow.
Yep.
Um, ROI, OKRs, all that stuff.
Yep.
How do I balance those things?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we could look at as simple maybe frameworks for thinking about this. Going back to that kind of VUCA sort of model, I was pulling earlier this year, I was pulling some notes from a person named Bob Johansson at the Institute for the Future. And so he talks about this topic as well. And if I'm thinking about, okay, so how do we help support and help this team navigate this world that we're describing? Well, if I can do anything to impart vision to be able to kind of upend some of that volatility, um, I'm going to be helping these people succeed in the future and near future
Mm.
more than if I just let them succumb to volatility alone. So,
Yep.
volatility, as Bob says, is going to yield to vision, and that's going to have future benefit. Again, similarly, uncertainty, he says, is going to yield to understanding. This is a time where we really need to be actively, intentionally, to borrow your word, listening. And certainly to this team, I really want to make sure that I'm fostering that kind of listening and understanding between team members as well.
Yep.
So I can have something to kind of help cut through the uncertainty. Complexity, we talked about this a little bit, it yields to clarity. Again, I don't want to be setting these people up to fail and those measures to be missed because I'm going to pretend that I can guarantee certainty in any of
Mm-hmm.
this. But if I can help build clarity, that means that these people are going to have a clear sense of where they're going, and we don't have to dictate how to get there. That part can remain flexible, but we're clear about where we want to aim for. You've heard me talk about in the canoe and
Yep.
C's and J's with your paddle in the canoe, right? I
Yep.
know I want to get to the other shore because there's a place to pull out there and do my next portage. How I get across that lake is going to be very, very curvilinear. It's not going to be a straight shot.
Right.
And then finally, ambiguity yields to agility. Um, and the only way I can kind of package that one up when I say agile, just so I can get rid of any notion of capital A religion stuff,
Yep. Yep.
um, is I mean, grounding these team members in a sense of humility and empathy. And I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's such a critical tool in our toolkit.
Yeah.
Because if we have that in place, people then can be open to new inputs, and they can be more able to perspective take, and understand others. And if we kind of package these things together, um, we are going to have a much better shot at delivering something that's more on target, is actually more effective. You used, OKRs and other measures and things like that we're chasing. I mean, OKRs, if they're written kind of in the spirit of that, right, are objective and they're behavior based.
Sure.
They're again kind of a human attempt at coming up with a measure other than just a simple metric,
Yeah.
right? Well, if we're practicing the sense of shared understanding, we're having clarity over certainty, and we're kind of flexible. I'm going to use the
Mm-hmm.
word flexible maybe instead of agile. We're going to have a much better shot of getting that canoe across the lake than if we're not paying attention to those things.
Right.
That
Well,
helps.
and that's why I say, Brian, like then why I'm digging down deeper in this is, tactically, a lot of this is what I'm hearing is a lot of this centers on communication. And I mean
Mhm.
communication in like its most truest form. Like I have actually communicated and you have
Yeah,
retained the information.
yeah,
And that's where the virtual part stumps me is that, I've always been a fan of the 7 times 7 different ways sort of
sure.
method, right?
Yep,
Where
yep.
it's like, to get these folks on the team to really understand what the vision is and what the expectations are in those things, telling them 7 different times in 7 different mediums,
Hmm.
or, it doesn't have to be a religious on the number seven, but more than just like, I'm going to send an email to the staff, that we're going to do
Right,
this organizational change.
right.
Um, what have you seen work? What doesn't work when it comes to when you're embarking on that journey? Because
Hmm.
to your point, you want to bring people along on the journey, right? That we're all in the canoe.
Yep.
But before we even get to the river and before we take the canoe off the roof, um, where should I be starting as a leader to start that communication? What forms have you seen work and what doesn't work?
Um, right. So, the say it 7 times, 7 different ways, or whatever magic number you want to pick, is something I've certainly kind of heard as well. And sometimes that actually is a not bad rule of thumb. People obviously are going to respond to messages and message formats in different ways. So kind of just doing that to kind of peanut butter a little bit of your message across and kind of hit some of those different bases, not necessarily a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, in a healthcare context, a year and a half ago, I was tasked to help champion a group to address specifically within a functional area under AVP um, top pain points that came out of employee engagement survey results from the year prior. So we had our marching orders, move the needle and do something to improve on these things as evidenced from a previous engagement survey. And one of the first things that we did is a small crew, right? Like a little action crew to come together around this is we adopted a principle of first, and this is something that I borrow from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute, stand in inquiry. So rather than, okay, what's our message and what are we going to communicate and how many emails are we going to send? The first thing was, what questions do we need to start asking? What do we need to start learning and understanding? Because yes, we have data and those data might be telling us something, but we don't know the why. There's a lot of nuance and context wrapped up in these responses. And a lot of that's aggregated away because we're just looking at these aggregate numbers.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get into the heart of those stories? So if we first adopted a kind of sense of stand first in inquiry, I want to know, I seek to know. Well, how do we do that? Well, we need to engage the people that responded to this thing. Well, we could do that directly, one-on-one. We could do it in further surveys. We could get people together in kind of roundtables. We could keep brainstorming all kinds of ways of soliciting some of this. What we chose to do is there was a natural point in time when this whole functional area was going to be coming together for kind of an all hands, all team sort of quarterly meeting. And so we actually threw those main pain points from the survey results up on the screen for everyone to be able to reflect on for a bit and see again and talk through them very, very candidly, say these are challenges for us as evidenced by you. So now we get a chance to reflect on that again. So we all are kind of ideally on the same page or closer to the same page about it.
Well, we're all agreeing
And
on the data, right? Where it's
yeah,
not like this
exactly.
because what I've seen is that without that kind of, again, back to the word intentionality,
Right.
anecdotal stuff will come up and be like, well, I've never heard a customer complain about that before, or
Right. Yeah.
I've worked here for 400 years and I've never seen a thing like that before, or that information.
Right. And so we got to that point where people could say, oh, yes, those things, those 5 things we see up there are definitely real. We feel them every day. Okay, great. Now, and this is something that we asked them to do, is sort of an individual kind of exercise because we wanted the group to be able to be together and have some shared kind of conversation. But we didn't want to lose out on the importance of like an unfiltered, hopefully more authentic individual perspective. So we allowed everybody a chance on their own to kind of have a little sheet that they could write some thoughts on. And we proposed a few questions, and they were all structured approximately around the idea of, okay, so if we take one of these top challenges, think about a world where you come to work and it's actually the opposite of that. That instead of, challenge A is now this thing that's actually a real strength of this group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you can really feel, you can sense it, you can taste it. How would you describe what that world is? Because what we wanted to do is get a sense of how do people legitimately sense in their surroundings
Yep.
that something is a thing, right? In
And
this case, it's a
agree that
thing.
that
Yeah.
thing is a thing.
Yeah. And in this case, that thing that they were sensing was a challenge. It was a negative. What would happen if they were asked to sense the positive aspect of that and tell us in their own words how they would know that it was right better, improved, etc. Because that's what we wanted to get to, is we wanted to understand not how we as this action crew were going to define success for a thing, but we wanted to understand, again, standing in inquiry, how are they going to legitimately feel that something has authentically changed?
Yep. Right.
And now I'm not talking metrics. I'm not talking OKRs. I didn't pre-bake an answer to this question. I just want to know what people would even sense to understand that something was different. And we were talking big things. I mean,
Yeah.
like aspects around trust. And how would you then elicit from people these different perspectives on what would make them feel trusted?
Right.
Or how could they see that leaders were behaving in such a way that trust was being engendered and nurtured as
Yeah.
opposed to not? And that's the kind of starting point we used. And we continued that sort of model throughout. And yeah, we used email to communicate. We had smaller dedicated groups to look at specific problems and get feedback.
Yep.
We did kind of more open-ended surveys to kind of solicit inputs in that regard. Sometimes we did this completely anonymously. Sometimes it was much more personal. But in the end, it was really always a question of being curious and trying to engender stories,
Yeah.
so that we didn't lose the context around someone's perspective. And that happily is sort of a great sort of set of ingredients for dealing with this highly uncertain set of circumstances. And it works virtually
Yeah.
too.
Sure.
Because a lot of these things were done with people who weren't necessarily co-located
Mm-hmm.
with the group, and we were still able to reach out in these different ways.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways that when we talk about the communication part, is if you're standing in inquiry and really seeking to understand first and foremost yourself, and then you're trying to do everything you can to engage and encourage stories, that actually pays dividends like crazy. I guarantee it, because I've seen that work, and I've seen trying to do the opposite absolutely not work.
Yeah, and I think it totally makes sense because the idea of letting people know, like, don't come in as your job title,
Right.
don't come in as a representative of your team or your work. Come in as an inquisitor, right? Um, I mean, back to good words to use for organizational change.
Investigator, explorer,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't come in as the director of quality assurance, right? Come in as an inspector of truth or something, like
Right.
we're all gonna, leave our titles at the door and we're coming in to solve this problem. Um, and that goes back again, why I bring up the virtual thing, Brian, is because I mean, I've even had some of my employees say, they feel a bit disconnected from the vision of the company because of the,
Yeah.
being outside. And, we're working really hard to make sure they feel that, and communication has been a big part of that, but all sorts of, but trying to meet them where they're at, not
Hmm.
necessarily just where the organization is uses for main communication lines. So
Yeah.
spending some time really understanding where they're at, how they're consuming information that's coming from the organization, what other ways of consuming information are they doing these days, and then
Yeah.
trying to find those channels as an organization, right? So I think for us, it's been that challenge. What else have you been seeing, Brian? I mean, in terms of, meeting people where they're at when it comes to this, volatile time.
Right. Right. Um, so I have, and I apologize to your audience, Kirk, because I know you know this about me, but the audience might not necessarily. I'm going to lean on very tangential, seemingly unrelated sort of sources
Oh
for
no, the
this, because that's how
tangential
my
is
brain
this show is almost
always
named
works.
the tangential show. So please.
All right. So I was fascinated by a recent, and I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb, a recent and brilliant um, piece, which was Pope Francis's newest encyclical. So I'm reading this because I had had it on good authority that there is a bunch of really smart stuff in there, and I can guarantee you there's a bunch of really smart stuff in there. Um, and I don't come from a Catholic background, so approaching this document would never have been something on my radar. Um, except that I saw the film Two Popes and I was really blown away. And so I started thinking about Francis as a figure and kind of what his thinking tends to bring to the public, sphere and
Yeah,
debate.
fantastic, fantastic.
Oh my
Highly
goodness.
recommended.
Oh my goodness. And so I read his encyclical, and time again, he comes back to this absolutely brilliant phrase that I can't get out of my head now. He calls it the culture of encounter. And when he said that, it immediately encapsulated so many of these different lines of thinking that have been kind of flittering through my brain for a long time now. This culture of encounter. Um, org leaders and change leaders, and so many think about, well, culture and culture change and this, that, and the other thing, and we could unravel that forever and not get to the bottom of it. But when you use that particular turn of phrase, culture of encounter, it started making me think, wow, okay, so if I adopt that principle, that whatever I do, virtual, co-located, in-person, remote, email, chat, whatever it might be, am I doing everything I can to foster, grow, nurture this sense of culture of encounter and all that implies to me? Because encounter, it puts me in almost this immediately and lovely, like, vulnerable state
Mm,
where I'm going to encounter Kurt,
hmm.
and I'm going to maybe even leave that encounter changed somehow. And that would be like the best thing, is that
Sure.
through that encounter, I take away something, that other person takes away something, and we both leave changed a little bit,
We've
ideally for
both
the
grown
better.
together.
We've both grown together. And so now I can't get rid of the sense of building culture of encounter. So virtually, how do we do that? Um, you mentioned the phrase kind of meeting people where they're at. And where people are at is going to continue to change over time. I mean, uh, I'm sure you remember back when email alone was like this huge new hurdle for people, this new communication paradigm that people just still to this day are grappling to really kind of
Yeah,
use
really.
as natively and eloquently or articulately as we would love.
True.
It's hard to write clearly. It really is.
Yeah.
Email just exacerbates that. Chat, maybe a little bit more quick, informal, off the cuff, a little more human, perhaps.
Hmm.
Still people struggle with that. Shared documents, video chat. Oh my God, I have to see my face on screen. All these kinds of things that come up when suddenly our visage and our image is right there and personal in front of somebody, and on and on and on. We are going to see things, and in fact, some people are already playing with tools like Spatial, which introduced sort of this cloud-based mixed reality shared workspace idea, where I don't have just some cartoony avatar kind of floating around, a chat stream or something. I literally have a 3D space that I'm interacting with my collaborators. I actually see facsimiles of them in that environment, and we have shared workspace tools like shared workspace whiteboard kind of thing, and maybe our
Hmm.
Miro stuff is on there, or we've got diagrams up and shared, and we actually see it on something that looks like a virtual whiteboard that we can interact with.
Yeah.
We could do that in a mixed reality sense. Some people could do it VR, some people could do it through like HoloLens or something like that, and actually see that in their own physical environment, kind of mixed.
Hmm.
Um, the tool itself isn't going to be the challenge. The meeting where people where they're at part isn't going to be just about, oh my goodness, now we're moving into this world of spatial and tools like it, where we have mixed reality and we're all kind of floating around like these uncanny
I like
valley
I like
avatars of
the I like
ourselves.
the iPad on top of a Segway moving around image
Oh,
is what I'm
yes.
picturing.
I think back, was it early 90s, late 80s, Demolition Man, that movie where they have the
Yes.
conference table with all the screens that kind of
Yes.
turn to
Yes.
follow.
He doesn't know how to
Um,
use the three seashells. Don't get me
right.
started. Sorry. I'll go. Speaking of tangential,
Exactly. So marry these thoughts together. All these tools that we're trying to use today in a virtual space, these tools that are right now on the very, very, precipice of where we're going to be shortly, and then tools we don't yet imagine. That doesn't let us off the hook of figuring out how to truly build this culture of encounter, like we talked about. So meeting people where they're at is again back to the sense of, and I know this is going to sound like an old saw, that humility and empathy combo. Because if I'm going to say to myself, I really want to understand where Kurt's at and try to meet him there, create that best possible encounter with him, I'm still seeking Kurt's stories. And I'm trying to find whatever channel is going to create that safer space for him to share those with me. And hopefully I show up as a really good listening partner for that and can take that in and maybe shed as much of my blind spots, bias, judgment. Oh my God, human beings are so judgy. Love it. It takes a lot of internal work to drop some of that stuff and be vulnerable enough to have that power of encounter. And I think that is something we ought to be very intentionally weaving into what we think about when we say meet people where they're at, and we're thinking tools only.
Yeah.
Because I think we're missing this huge dimension of what it really might mean for us to encounter people. And that could be playing games together
Right.
in a shared way. In a proper, like real work context, we're taking time to come together around a game of some kind. We're taking time to come together around some other kind of communal and very human activity where we get to share a lot more of those stories. Because I found that, well, even with some of your collaborators and coworkers, I was invited to kind of participate in
Hmm.
sort of a virtual sort of get together happy hour type of thing.
Yeah.
Even something like that with a room full of strangers. Oh my goodness, before I even knew it, I had people hit me on the sideline with some chat stuff and ask me questions about this, that, and the other. And we were sharing tips about refinishing decks and things. And
Yep.
suddenly it's palpably, authentically human, and I can't help but want to figure out how to work with these various people better. I can't help but want to start sharing some more of what I might be able to contribute and then walk away having learned something in turn. And we wouldn't get to that point if we didn't try to craft and create these sandboxes for us to
Yep.
come together in. And for some people to say, well, but that's not work and blah, blah, blah. To me, it doesn't matter. It's human.
Yeah.
And
Well,
if we
it's like you
work
said,
on that stuff,
it's encouraging that inquiry, like we talked about
yes,
at the beginning of
absolutely.
this, right? It's so that
Absolutely.
you're hoping that they're bringing that to work, to that problem solving.
Yes, exactly right.
Yep.
Yep.
Makes sense. Okay, Brian, last question here before we wrap up. Where do you see things going in terms of, organizations are going to constantly change. They're going to evolve even more so, right? They're
Yeah.
even saying right now, like 40% of people who are working from home are estimated never to go back in the office, and all
Mhm.
these different things. And organizational changes, the idea of it, it's necessary. It's necessary as an organization grows that they mature, and sometimes
Yep.
that maturity means getting the right people in the right seats or moving people around as that happens. But you brought up spatial, which I think is a great example. But what other sorts of things do you see in the future that people should be paying attention to when it comes to the frameworks, the tools, the ideology around um, this change management? What should I be out there consuming and looking for to your point, to to sort of building up that ability to lead that change? Where do you
Right.
see it?
Ooh.
Two
If I had
pulse?
my fingers in the pulses of all those things, that'd be awesome. I guess I would share something more on kind of like the mindset and framework side. So you mentioned like ideologies and things like that.
Yeah, yeah,
What are
yeah.
we going to be seeing evolve? Um, Fundamentally, what a healthy business, and when I say healthy, I mean like you said ROI and OKRs and things like that before. Like fundamentally, the business is healthy. It's profitable. It's meeting its mandates, whatever that might be. We are going to see a shift, and indeed already are seeing a shift from a couple perspectives. One, how centralizing or centralized of an organization or institution is this versus how decentralized
Hmm.
this institution is. And the other one is how regenerative is this business in its work, in its output, in its enterprise versus degenerative. And let me take a really quick second to
Yeah, yeah.
unpack kind of what I mean by that stuff. I'll go in reverse order. So, degenerative, traditional business, take, make, sell, lose, or some people use other words for that stuff, but basically, raw materials, resources, inputs, et cetera. I take that stuff, I jam them together into something, a product, a service, what have you. It gets used up and then it's done. At worst, it's thrown away. A degenerative kind of enterprise. Regenerative. Um, the outputs of one kind of process become the fuel and food and fodder for the next. So the waste of one thing actually becomes the food for another thing. and that can be construed in terms of very material dimensions, like raw materials turned into waste product, the waste product actually turned into new raw materials for something else. Or we could be thinking about it in terms of our own contributions. Do the energies and creativity of people in my organization or institution, does that output then revitalize something else? Are we as a business in the business of community wealth building? And so everybody in the communities that we're supporting and service and sell to are now able to participate in a way that's not just limited to being a customer, or their voice comes to us only as a consumer,
Right.
but we're actually seeing them as a part of a broader ecosystem of our business. So regenerative on that side versus degenerative. And then the other one being centralized, decentralized. We're already seeing the effects of the decentralized part. You just mentioned that, I think you said 40% may never return to a typical co-located working kind of environment. How about the leadership sense of that? Because if we're still leaning on over 100-year-old top-down sort of authoritarian structures, how long is it going to take for that to fracture and fail? I would argue it already has, and has been for a long time, because we can't meet these challenges very gracefully. I'll use that word. So then how decentralized does that decision-making and that leadership become? And that actually might be a much better fit for what we're seeing today and what we're going to see in near days to come. Because again, we're wrapping all these themes back together, right, Kurt? If we're standing in inquiry and really achieving the aim of learning and encouraging these stories and inputs from people as more of their authentic selves, that leadership acumen has to change to fit as well. And so now again, people are encouraging a kind of collaboration that is built on those things we've already talked about. Those are the two big patterns that I've seen come out of the work of a lot of people. Economists, Marjorie Kelly is a great name to look up. She's kind of on the forefront of looking at a lot of these new organizational changes and structures. That's kind of what's on my radar right now.
That's great. That's fantastic, Brian. Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. I'm seeing I'm seeing the degenerative companies really struggling. They're struggling, and and I love how you put that. I've seen the regenerative ones really. They're growing, and they're becoming even stronger in today's world. So I totally agree, and I think that's something any business owner or leader should really be focusing on for the near term, because it's going to just help bolster their impact, the dent in the universe, as I like to say, that you want to make. Right?
Yeah, I like that. And if I may, because I think we still have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Marjorie Kelly actually has kind of outlined this. I've got my notes here. I'm kind of riffing off of some of her contributions to help those leaders, because someone's going to say, okay, Brian, that's cute. It's all cute, right? Kumbaya, right? We're around the fireplace when we finally can stop social distancing so crazy, and we're all thinking kumbaya. I'm not talking about cute, fuzzy feels, kumbaya, anything here. I'm talking dollars and cents, hard, bottom line stuff. And Ms. Kelly actually kind of puts it into a neater package than I've managed to express, because she talks about kind of these 5 key things that those leaders will have to be mindful of. Purpose. Why does the organization exist? I loved your phrase, dent in the universe. Why not be bold and brazen enough to say our purpose is to make a dent in the universe? And here's kind of what that means for us. Networks. What are the organization's networks? How does it relate to its own internal, constituents, employees, members? How does it relate to its customers, the people it's serving, the people in its communities? Just so I can start getting away from client, customer, consumer, and get into this more people-centric kind of language. And how are we getting caught up in a culture that either supports all of those networked individuals or undermines them? Is something to be thinking through. Governance. So how is the organization governed? And we were already talking about, is this moving towards a decentralized kind of leadership? That could also be, do we own land? Do we own resources? Are we approaching this kind of challenge of the commons in a different sense? Are we thinking regeneratively? And governance is actually tied to how regenerative we can be, for example. Ownership. Who owns the organization? Asking ourselves that. I've seen companies like Moog Music, for example, in Raleigh, North Carolina. They, in the past couple of years, switched to an entirely employee-owned model. Is this a venture capital situation? And that leads us to the last one, finance. How is your organization financed? If it's venture capital or other kinds of funding sources, equity sources, are they looking for a quick buck and a quick turn? Or are you partnering with institutions, banks, financiers who are looking for a longer term return on what they've put into your organization? And that's what they're chasing. Because if we start to really balance those questions, we can actually get to a deeper root of living in a VUCA world where
Yep.
things are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous.
Yeah. Well, and
So thank you,
it
Ms. Kelly, because those are
yeah.
fascinating ways of kind of bundling together the things we really be thinking of as business leaders.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'll put some links in the bottom for people to check out more
Right.
stuff as well. So, Brian, thank you again for joining me. I always learn so much from every conversation I have with you.
Same here.
If I want to reach out and talk to Brian, I want to pick your brain some more about this sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Where's a great place to find you? Where do you frequent in this virtual world?
In the virtual world, I'm usually most active on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So if they find me, Izzy Monkey is kind of the place where you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can look me up under Brian Rowe and you'll find me. Um, uh, at Izzy_Monkey is on Twitter. I don't tweet a ton, but I do try to pay attention to people who are saying smart things.
Yep,
And then also people can look at some of your back catalog of broadcasts from before, because there's
that's
some things
right.
that you and I have
Yes.
done together in the past too.
Yes, we've had a number of great conversations. So I definitely suggest people go back, search the archives for Mr. Rowe, and consume more. Well, Brian, you got to come back on sometime soon. I really
Happy to.
enjoy the chance to talk to you today.
Oh, and same here. And again, to your audience, I mean, anybody who wants to reach out and connect, I frankly really value relationship building and deepening relationships and fostering that interconnectedness. So
Awesome.
hit me up. I'm open.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on the show today. Again, thanks to Brian. I really appreciate his time and energy. I hope the rest of you have a great week. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like thing. And yeah, you got to say it. Otherwise, people don't seem to do it. I don't know. So check out the channel for more content coming soon. We're going to be talking a lot more about how to handle a VUCA world, as Brian put it, over the next few episodes. So thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your week.